Tuesday afternoon, a luxury supercar showroom in the heart of the city's high-end district. Shimmering lights dance across carbon fiber bodies worth millions. Among the elite, a 43-year-old man in a simple jacket and scuffed shoes walks in, holding his 9-year-old son's hand. The boy's eyes are wide. "Dad, are these real race cars?" Sales staff watch with suspicion. As they pause before the latest hybrid masterpiece, the CEO smirks. "Sir, these cars aren't for browsing." A few customers snicker. The man stays calm. He asks one technical question. Suddenly, when the owner stops. "Good to see you again, my sir." The room goes silent. Watch him now. Michael Lawson was a man who lived in the quiet world of high-stakes precision. At 43, his face was a map of focus and patience, etched with the subtle, deep lines of a man who spent his nights staring at complex thermodynamic simulations and his days raising a son in a world that often moved too fast. He wasn't a man of labels, designer fabrics, or flashy accessories. He drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled on gravel, wore off-the-rack cotton shirts, and valued the internal integrity of a machine over the expensive shine of its paint. Michael was an independent mechanical engineer, a consultant for high-performance engine design, whose name was whispered in the pits of Maranello in Stuttgart. To the general public, he was invisible. To his son, Noah, he was the man who could explain exactly how the wind moved the entire world. Noah was 9 years old, and for the past month, his world had been entirely consumed by a school science project titled The Future of Hybrid Energy. He didn't want to build a simple vinegar volcano or a baking soda rocket. He wanted to understand the magic of how electricity and gasoline could dance together in perfect synchronization to reach 200 miles per hour. Michael had promised him a reward for finishing the project with an A+, a trip to the flagship Rossi Motors showroom to see the Aura V12 Hybrid in the flesh. The showroom was a cathedral of glass, steel, and cold ambition. As Michael and Noah stepped through the heavy revolving doors, the scent of expensive Italian leather and industrial-grade ceramic wax hit them like a wall. It was a place carefully designed to make people feel either incredibly powerful or devastatingly small. Michael felt neither. He felt a familiar curiosity. Noah, however, was buzzing with an electric energy. He moved toward the primary display car as if it were a holy relic, his faded school backpack bouncing rhythmically against his small, thin shoulders. The sales team, dressed in three-piece silk suits that cost more than Michael's monthly consulting fees, exchanged guarded looks. They were currently attending to a group of legitimate buyers, men with platinum watches, loud voices, and a desperate need to be noticed. To the staff, Michael and Noah were just tourists, a distraction from the commission-heavy air of the room. Michael didn't mind the coldness. He leaned over the carbon fiber barrier, pointing out the subtle, aggressive curve of the active aero flaps to Noah. "See that gap there, Noah?" Michael whispered, his voice steady and warm, cutting through the ambient techno music. "That's not just for aesthetics. That's about downforce. It's how the car talks to the air, so it doesn't fly away when the physics get heavy." Noah nodded, his eyes wide as he absorbed every word. But as they drifted closer to the central engine display, the exposed, beating heart of the machine, they crossed into the territorial circle of Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was the 35-year-old CEO of the dealership, a woman whose meteoric success was built on a razor-sharp, often cruel ability to judge a bank account by the quality of a man's shoes. She was in the middle of explaining the unrivaled exclusivity of the Aura to a group of bored venture capitalists. When she saw the man in the humble, worn jacket and the boy with the dinosaur stickers on his backpack leaning over her most expensive asset, her professional smile vanished, replaced by a thin, jagged line of irritation. She saw a smudge on her perfect, high-gloss landscape. Vanessa Cole thrived on a specific type of control. She believed that a luxury brand was maintained as much by the people you excluded as by the people you invited in. She walked toward Michael and Noah, her designer heels clicking a sharp, aggressive rhythm on the polished marble floor. The group of VIPs followed her, sensing a moment of high-stakes social theater, a distraction from their talk of margins and acquisitions. "Excuse me, sir," Vanessa began, her voice carrying that specific polite ice that is far more insulting then a direct shout. I'm afraid we have a very busy floor today, and we are expecting several high-priority appointments. These cars, well, they aren't exactly for casual browsing. They are precision instruments meant for a specific kind of serious collector who understands the investment. She looked pointedly at Michael's scuffed leather shoes and then at the small plastic toy car Noah was clutching in his left hand. A few of the VIPs chuckled. One man, adjusting his diamond cufflinks, let out a shallow, patronizing laugh. Maybe they have a poster section in the back for the kids, Vanessa. Let's keep the floor clear for the grown-ups. Michael straightened his posture. He didn't pull Noah back into the shadows. He didn't blush or look at the floor in shame. He looked at Vanessa with a calm, analytical gaze. The same gaze he used when a high-pressure cooling system failed under extreme stress. He wasn't angry for himself, but he felt a sharp, protective pang for Noah, who had suddenly gone very quiet, his excitement dimming. "We're not here for a poster," Michael said simply. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to settle the air in the room, making the music feel unnecessary. "My son is interested in the hybrid integration. He's done quite a bit of primary research on the thermal dynamics and energy recovery systems of this specific model." Vanessa's smirk widened, dripping with a condescending irony. "Thermal dynamics? That's charming, really. But research doesn't pay for the complex maintenance on a V12 block. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the local auto show in the park? This is a private showing for clients who can afford to actually start the engine." The mockery was absolute. She was telling them they were a waste of oxygen in a room worth $50 million. Michael looked at the engine display behind her, a pristine silver cutaway of the Aura's heart. His eyes scanned the magnesium alloy tubes and the wiring looms. He noticed a detail that the glossy marketing brochures had carefully omitted. "Is this the updated cooling path for the 2024 hybrid module?" Michael asked, pointing toward a complex series of magnesium alloy tubes near the rear axle. "The one designed to mitigate the vortex blockage in the secondary radiators?" The room went deathly quiet. A lead technician, who had been buffing a nearby fender, stopped his cloth mid-motion and turned around. Vanessa blinked. She had spent 2 weeks memorizing the sales script, but she didn't actually know what a vortex blockage was. She knew the price, the leather options, and the 0 to 60 time, but she didn't know the soul of the machine. "It's the standard high-performance package," she replied, her tone becoming sharp and defensive. "As I said, it's not something for casual amateur discussion. It's highly classified engineering." Michael shook his head slowly, a faint smile of knowledge appearing. "Actually, if this is the production model, that intake angle is redirected to solve the heat soak issue in the rear battery bank. But looking at this manifold, you're still using the old sensor placement. Doesn't that cause a severe logic conflict during high RPM transitions in humid conditions?" Noah looked up at his dad, his eyes starting to glow again. "Is that why the computer gets confused and slows the car down, Dad? Like in the paper I wrote?" Michael smiled and ruffled Noah's hair. "Exactly, pal. If the sensor is too close to the exhaust heat, it lies to the computer. The car thinks it's melting even when the coolant is ice cold. It's a fundamental design flaw they've been trying to hide." Vanessa's face flushed a deep, angry red. She felt her carefully curated authority slipping in front of her most important clients. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately. You're disrupting my presentation with technical jargon you likely misread in an enthusiast magazine. Security will escort you out if you don't move toward the exit right now." The VIPs were no longer laughing. They were looking at the engine, then at Michael, then back at Vanessa with suspicion. The nobody in the simple jacket had just asked a question that the CEO of the dealership couldn't answer. The tension was at its breaking point. Vanessa reached for her radio, her hand trembling with a mix of ego and professional embarrassment. But before she could press the button, the heavy mahogany door of the executive suite swung open. A man in his late 50s, wearing a simple white lab coat over a tailored shirt, stepped out. Daniel Rossi, the legendary billionaire founder of the entire brand, had been listening to the conversation from the doorway. He didn't look at Vanessa. He didn't look at the VIPs. He walked straight toward the man in the simple jacket. Daniel Rossi was a titan in the automotive world, a man who famously valued a good knot in a weld more than $1 billion stock valuation. He walked past the stunned security guards and the frozen sales team with a purposeful stride. He stopped exactly 3 feet from Michael Lawson. For a long, agonizing heartbeat, the showroom was a total vacuum of sound. Vanessa was ready to offer a groveling apology for the intrusion of the commoner. The VIPs were ready to see a trespassing father removed from the premises. But Daniel Rossi didn't call for security. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Michael's. Then, his weathered face broke into a look of genuine, profound relief. The kind of look a man gives a long-lost brother. "Michael?" Rossi's voice was hushed, almost reverent, lacking any of his usual corporate thunder. "Michael Lawson? Is that really you? Or am I seeing ghosts in my own showroom?" Michael gave a small, humble nod, though a spark of old fire returned to his eyes. "It's been a while, Daniel. You've certainly built quite a cathedral here since the last time we spoke in the rain at Le Mans." Daniel Rossi didn't care about the expensive decor or the wealthy clients watching. He reached out and gripped Michael's hand with both of his, shaking it with an intensity that left the room in absolute shock. "Good to see you again, sir. Truly. I've been looking for you for nearly 3 years. Your old firm in London said you'd retired from the industry entirely. I didn't believe a word of it. I thought you'd just gone to work for the competition in secret." Vanessa Cole stepped forward, her voice a shaky, high-pitched whisper. "Mr. Rossi, do you actually know this man? He was asking questions that weren't on the official spec sheet. I was just trying to maintain the floor's integrity." Rossi turned to Vanessa, his eyes narrowing into cold slits of steel. The Ice Queen suddenly looked like a terrified intern. "Know him?" Rossi asked, his voice now booming through the glass hall, vibrating the windows. "Vanessa, you're standing in a showroom where half the cars on the floor only exist because of this man's brain. Michael Lawson was the lead thermodynamic architect for the Rossi Omega project. He is the reason these engines don't explode into a ball of fire when they hit 200 miles per hour. He designed the very cooling system you were just struggling to explain to these gentlemen." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The man who had been told he wasn't appropriate for the room was revealed as the man who had built the room. The VIPs shifted uncomfortably. The man who had laughed earlier, now looking intensely at the patterns on the marble floor, wishing he could disappear. Rossi looked down at Noah, who was staring at the billionaire with wide-eyed, silent shock. "And who is this? A new Rossi engineer in training? He has the Lawson eyes." Michael smiled, his hand resting firmly and proudly on Noah's shoulder. "This is Noah. He's the reason I'm not in the industry anymore, Daniel. He had a science project on hybrid engines, and I realized I'd rather help him with his homework than help you with your quarterly profit margins. I moved back home to be a full-time dad." The truth began to ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. 4 years ago, Michael Lawson had been at the absolute untouchable pinnacle of his career. He was known as the ghost of the track, the only engineer every major manufacturer in the world wanted on their development team. But when his wife, Sarah, had fallen ill with a terminal diagnosis, Michael didn't hesitate for a single second. He walked away from the 6-figure bonuses, the private jets, and the international fame. He sold his shares, deleted his professional profiles, and moved back to his quiet hometown to be a father. After Sarah passed, he chose a life of aggressive simplicity so that Noah would never have to wonder where his dad was at 6 p.m. Rossi sighed, a look of deep, sorrowful respect in his eyes. "I remember the day you sent that resignation, Michael. My father told me I was losing the smartest man in Europe. He was right. We've struggled with the thermal sink on the Aura for 18 months. My current team is brilliant, but they don't have your ears. They don't listen to the metal the way you do. They look at screens. You look at the soul of the engine." Rossi turned back to Vanessa, his tone turning clinical and professional. "Vanessa, Mr. Lawson is a primary consultant of this brand's very legacy. He doesn't need to browse. He has an open invitation to every restricted facility we own on 3 continents. If he ever walks through those doors again, in a jacket, in overalls, or in a t-shirt, you treat him with the same respect you'd give my own father. Is that understood?" Vanessa could barely manage a nod. She was as pale as the white lilies in the lobby. She realized then that her razor-sharp ability to judge a bank account had completely missed the most valuable thing in the entire building: character and expertise. "Michael," Rossi said, turning back to his old friend with a pleading look, "will you at least look at the production manifold for me before you leave? We're losing 3% efficiency at high loads in the heat, and I suspect you just found the reason while you were talking to your son." Michael looked down at Noah. Noah gave an enthusiastic two-handed thumbs up. "I'll give you 20 minutes, Daniel," Michael said with a playful wink. "But only if you explain to my son why you chose a magnesium alloy for the secondary turbos instead of titanium. He's been arguing with me about the weight-to-heat ratio all morning, and he needs a second opinion." Rossi laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the cathedral of steel. "Noah, come with me. Let's talk about titanium. It's a lot more interesting than these people in suits anyway. They just talk about money. We talk about magic." As they walked toward the technical bay, the nobody in the simple jacket was no longer a shadow in the corner. He was the architect. He was the master. And the world was finally watching him with its hat off and its mouth closed. The atmosphere in the showroom had shifted from an exclusive, gate-kept club to a masterclass in humility. The VIPs, who 10 minutes ago were snickering at a distraction, were now leaning in over the barriers, desperate to catch a single word of what Michael had to say. They realized that the real power in the room wasn't the man with the loudest voice or the most expensive watch. It was the man who actually understood how the universe worked. Vanessa Cole stood in the far corner, her professional armor completely shattered. She watched as Michael, Daniel Rossi, and little Noah huddled around the open engine bay of a $2 million prototype. Michael was pointing at a sensor housing with a pen, his movements precise, confident, and without any ego. Daniel Rossi was nodding like a first-year student, taking rapid notes on a digital tablet. Vanessa realized that in her frantic rush to protect the image of the brand, she had nearly insulted and evicted the very person who had created its physical substance. She took a deep, shaky breath, straightened her designer jacket, and walked toward the trio. She didn't approach as a CEO this time. She approached as a person who had just received a multi-million-dollar lesson in humility for free. "Mr. Lawson," she said, waiting patiently for a pause in the technical discussion. Michael looked up, his expression entirely neutral. He didn't hold a grudge. He had seen many people like Vanessa in the boardrooms of Milan, Tokyo, and Stuttgart, people who mistook the price tag for the value of the soul. I want to apologize, Michael," Vanessa said, her voice quiet but steady. "I was incredibly short-sighted. I judged you by the surface, by the uniform of your life today, and I was profoundly wrong. I hope you can forgive my arrogance. And Noah, I'm sorry I wasn't more helpful with your project. You clearly have the most gifted teacher in the world." Noah smiled, his small chest puffing out with an immense pride. "My dad is the smartest guy in the whole world," he said firmly, clutching his Rossi car model. Michael nodded once, a brief, respectful acknowledgement. "It's all right, Ms. Cole. In my world of engineering, we call that a calibration error. You were simply measuring the wrong variables to determine the output. It happens to the best of us. Just remember that the person asking the most questions is often far more important than the person giving the rehearsed answers." Vanessa nodded, a genuine, humble smile touching her lips for the first time in years. "I'll remember that. Thank you, sir." Rossi looked up from the engine, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. "Good. Now that we've recalibrated the room's ego, Michael, look at this fuel rail. If we move the secondary sensor here, do we risk a thermal feedback loop with the high-pressure pump during a hot start?" For the next hour, the showroom floor became a high-tech laboratory. The VIPs stayed, but they stayed as silent observers, watching a genius at work. Rossi didn't just ask Michael about the engine. He asked him about his life. He asked about Noah's school and Michael's quiet house in the suburbs. "You know, Michael," Rossi said, leaning against the fender of the Aura as they finished, "I could really use a chief of strategic engineering, someone who only works when they want to, someone who doesn't have to travel or deal with the press. I'd pay you triple what you're making as a consultant just to have you look at my designs once a week. You could even bring the kid to the lab. I've got a wind tunnel that would make his science project the talk of the entire country. Confronting. Michael looked at Noah, who was currently inspecting the steering wheel of the car, with the absolute seriousness of a veteran Formula One driver. He thought about the peace they had finally found in their simple, quiet life. He thought about the school runs and the Saturday morning blueberry pancakes. I appreciate the offer, Daniel. I really do, Michael said softly, looking his old friend in the eye. But I've already got the best job in the world. I'm a dad, and right now my boss wants to go get some chocolate ice cream to celebrate finishing his project. Rossi laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the entire building. Fair enough, Michael, but the offer stays open. Forever. If you ever get tired of being a full-time hero at home, come back and help me build some more magic for the world. As they prepared to leave, Rossi handed Noah a small, heavy box. Inside was a scale model of the Aura, made of the same hand-laid carbon fiber and magnesium alloy as the real car. For your project, Noah, tell your teacher that the man who built the real thing said you're the one who found the ghost in the cooling system. Noah beamed, clutching the box as if it were made of solid diamond. Michael shook Rossi's hand one last time, a firm, silent promise of a lifelong friendship. Vanessa Cole herself opened the door for them as they walked out. She didn't say a word, but she bowed her head slightly in a gesture of genuine, deep-seated respect. The simple man and the little boy walked out of the luxury showroom with the same quiet dignity they had when they walked in. But this time, the entire world was watching them with its hat off. The sun was beginning to set over the city, painting the skyscrapers in brilliant shades of liquid gold and oxidized copper. As Michael and Noah walked back toward their old sedan in the far corner of the parking lot, the world felt different. Noah was quiet for a long time, looking down at the small carbon fiber car in his hands, tracing the lines of the engine bay. "Dad?" Noah asked as Michael started the engine, which coughed once before settling into its familiar, rough idle. "Yes, pal." "Why didn't you tell that lady who you were? You knew more about the car than she did. You could have told her you were the boss of the engine and made her feel small." Michael pulled out of the parking lot, his eyes steady and calm on the road ahead. He smiled, a soft, tired expression that reflected the absolute peace in his heart. "Because that wasn't why we came there, Noah. We came to see the car for your project. We didn't come to win an argument, to show off, or to prove we were better than anyone else." "But she was being really mean," Noah said, his voice small and reflective. "She thought we were poor because of your shoes and my old backpack. She didn't think we belonged there." Michael shifted gears, the old engine responding with a familiar, comforting mechanical growl. "People often use money and expensive clothes as a shield, Noah. They think it protects them from feeling unimportant or invisible. But true expertise, real knowledge, it doesn't need a shield. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just stays calm and silent until the moment it's actually needed to solve a problem." He looked at his son, his gaze serious but infinitely kind. "Remember what happened when Mr. Rossi came out? He didn't look at my scuffed shoes. He didn't look at your backpack. He looked at my eyes. He remembered the work we did together when it was hard. He remembered the truth. That's what you should aim for in life, Noah. Be so good at what you do, be so honest in your work, that people remember your integrity, not your outfit." Noah thought about this for a long moment, watching the high-end showroom disappear into the distance in the rearview mirror. "Do you think she'll be nicer to the next dad who comes in with a backpack and a question?" "I think she learned a lesson today that no business school could ever teach her," Michael replied. "She learned that you never truly know who is standing in front of you. Always respect the person asking questions about your work, Noah, because they might be the only ones in the room who are actually listening to what you're trying to say." They stopped for ice cream at a small weathered shop near their house. They didn't talk about supercars, million-dollar engines, or billionaire owners. They talked about Noah's science presentation and whether they should add a turbo boost button to the presentation board using a recycled spring. That evening, as Michael tucked Noah into bed, The small carbon fiber car was sitting on the nightstand, glowing softly under the dim light of the bedside lamp. "Dad?" Noah whispered, his eyes heavy with sleep but full of dreams. "Yeah, pal. I'm going to design a car one day, a really, really fast one that helps the Earth." Michael smiled and kissed his son's forehead. "I know you will, Noah. I have no doubt about it. And I'll make sure the cooling system is perfect," Noah promised, his voice fading into sleep. "Just like yours." Michael sat in the quiet of their small living room for a long time after that. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had been rejected by a CEO and honored by a billionaire in the same hour. He realized that the greatest luxury in the entire world wasn't the carbon fiber, the V12 hybrid, or the fame he had left behind. It was the peace of mind that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the rest of the world has no idea. True expertise doesn't need to be proven to strangers. It just needs to stay calm until the truth decides to speak for itself. Michael Lawson went to sleep that night knowing that he wasn't just an engineer, he was a father. And that was the only title that would ever truly matter in the final lap. If you believe that a person's value isn't defined by the price of their clothes, but by the integrity of their work, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged before people knew your story? How did you react?